What's up, YouTube? Welcome into another live show tonight. I am John Kurtz. You guys know by now if you've been here on the channel for a while. What we do here, we talk about college football. We talk about the Big 12, and man, I am looking forward to what should be an exciting show tonight. This should be an exciting, pretty celebratory day because we now have the official news that the Big 12 is going to be, I would say, complete, but I don't know that that's really the right phrase because it may be that awkward in between phase for a year or two, but we know now that the three teams from the AAC are going to be joining the league in 2023. We also have the details on what it is going to cost those three schools, being UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston, to leave the AAC. And I would say that it is very good news for them what that price tag actually was. So good news all around. The Big 12 knows for sure now the future of the league for 2023, what it is going to look like, and the new schools got a pretty reasonable deal to get out of the AAC. This is good stuff, guys. Good stuff. Reignites a lot of debates about what this league is going to look like and what is going to happen when all these teams come in the league. And frankly, I'm kind of here for it. Even though we have done versions of this debate before, who will fare best out of the four new schools, who will fare best overall, what's this new league going to look like? We kind of had those conversations when we first found out about this becoming official back in the late summer period, but I'm here for it again. And things have changed since then. I mean, when we were having that discussion then, the Cincinnati stuff was more hypothetical about what they could do for the upcoming year. Well, now Cincinnati has actually made a playoff. That changes the tenor of this discussion. I put it out to Twitter today, and Twitter has been very fun with UCF fans, BYU fans, Cincy fans, and Houston fans in particular. A lot of debate, just putting out the poll, who is going to fare the best. And I mean, right now, I don't think there's a lot to discern necessarily from what the results of that poll are, just because it's been taken over by UCF Twitter, BYU Twitter, which is fine. That's what it's for, and it's fun. But right now, it's basically just a reflection of who has the most powerful internet fan bases, which is not what this will actually center on when the time comes, right? So we'll break that down. I want to talk about that today. Who is going to fare the best out of these four schools? Somebody hit me with a question on Twitter that I thought was a good one that has not been discussed nearly as much, and that is who is going to have the worst time of not just the new schools, but who will be hurt the most out of the current teams that are in the Big 12 by the influx of these four in 2023, which is a very interesting question. And most of the talk has been about the other side of that, who's going to come in and dominate, as opposed to who will this actually affect the most in a negative sense. So we can have that conversation as well. Let me go through the rest of my outline here. I've got a lot of stuff outlined for you. We are going to talk about that price tag that it costs to get out of the AAC and why I think, like, honestly, really bargain bin price for all three of these schools when you hold it up relative to what happened to UConn. Okay, here's another big part. And you saw in the video the way that I teased this, that the four new schools are going to get a chance at Texas and Oklahoma. They're going to get their shot to play Texas and Oklahoma. That is not officially official, right? Because right now, Texas and Oklahoma would be staying until 2025. They have said nothing to the contrary of that, but we know it could change at any time. However, we did for the first time, really, I can remember this whole process. We got something from an actual media member in Austin or Norman. In this case, it's Austin, Brian Davis from the Austin American-Statesman. There was an update on a timeline for Texas and Oklahoma. And it's a good update if you are BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, or Houston. I will tell you that much. If you're somebody that wants to see those games played, really, it's a good update for everybody else in the Big 12 too, because I think all of us at this point that are not Texas and Oklahoma are very much rooting for at least one of those years to happen. One of the awkward years where it's a 14-team league. I'm very much here for that. Not just from the standpoint of like, hey, can you imagine what those YouTube lives are going to be like and what those shows will be like, but also just from the mere standpoint of Texas and Oklahoma being forced into uncomfortable situations. It's a good update on that front, and just merely getting any kind of update at all at this point was surprising to me, because we've been waiting for that for so long and there had been nothing like concrete from any of these guys. I saw a very interesting discussion. We're breaking down like all four of these new schools, right? And who's going to fare the best. But a guy that I like to listen to a lot here locally on Kansas City Sports Talk Radio raised the question about Houston versus UCF specifically. And I thought that discussion was very interesting, because to me, there was a fairly clear answer there as to who would fare better over, say, the next 10 years. And it was the opposite of the take that I heard this local radio host having. So that was another thing I put out to Twitter today, and I want to discuss some here. Houston or UCF, who is going to have the better time in the league? Let's see. I feel bad. I messed up last time a little bit. I had an Oklahoma State fan get after me, rightfully so, for not getting into the Stuart Mandel mailbag question about Oklahoma State's future and if they're a top 20 program, which I feel like we'll lump in and kind of tail off of this discussion pretty well. So we can talk about that today. I think Oklahoma State is undoubtedly a top 20 program. I didn't get to it last time. I do, as a reminder, I mark out, if you look at the bottom of the video, I go in after the live is done and I update the chapters so you can see when I'm talking about different things. And that's an easy way to kind of gauge if I get to what you feel like your topic is that you're waiting for. So I will just give you that. So hopefully next time it doesn't turn into watching the whole thing and then being disappointed. I do apologize for that. And Lincoln Riley is talking some more, man. We'll see if we have time for this one today. If not, I may do a separate video on this. I agree with a chunk of what Lincoln Riley had to say. He's also lying through his teeth about another part of it. And no matter what, the fact that he just keeps talking and doing interviews about his departure from Oklahoma, I don't think is good for anybody at this point in the process. And I don't understand why it continues to happen. So that is another thing potentially on the docket. But there's a ton of meat on the bone here with the new schools coming into the Big 12. That is going to dominate a lot of the discussion here today. But if you have things that you want to talk about, make sure to get it in by not only the chat, which I see everybody in the chat. Well, let me go say hi to everybody here real quick. West Virginia guys, Studio LB, G Brew, Ricardo, Julius, Studio LB, Joe, Powercat Jeffy, Allen, Durwake, Snake, Rob S, Powercat Jeffy. What's up, everybody? Welcome into the chat tonight. If you would like to not just join the regular chat, but make sure that I see what's going on there. It's hard for me to catch most of what's happening in the chat. You can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Clicking that $ and donating will get your question or comment up to the top. It will pin it up there for me so that I will see it. Guarantees that it's going to get read here on the chat. So you can dictate where the conversation is going by utilizing that function. And the donations support the work that I'm doing here on the channel to bring you good quality Big 12 content week in and week out. And that is what I intend to keep doing. So would appreciate all of you doing that. And hey, you can do this for free. Just one click of the mouse. All it takes is liking the video. Just like the video. We got 74 people here in the chat, 15 likes on that video. Let's get that ratio up. It is free, helps me out with the YouTube algorithm and all that. I appreciate it. As always, those of you who are there. Okay, let's get this thing off and running. Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU are all going to be in the league in 2023. We already knew about BYU, but the American Athletic Conference came out with a release on Friday. Not great timing for your boy here to get out like an instant reaction video. Had a pretty busy weekend this weekend, but alas, here I am a little bit early on a Sunday, by the way. Look at that. Like me I'm going to try and stick to a time moving forward. Maybe we can talk more about that later in the video. But here is what the AAC had to say. Mike Oresco, much maligned at times here on this channel, the commissioner of the AAC, had to say this, quote, "I would like to thank UCF President Alexander Cartwright, Cincinnati President Neville," okay, blah, blah, blah. He's thanking the presidents for their efforts and leadership to arrive at a sensible resolution to the three schools' departure from the conference. All three institutions enjoyed tremendous success under the American Athletic Conference banner, and all three were instrumental in taking the conference to great heights, both athletically and academically. We wish them the best and look forward to having them compete in our conferences in 2022-2023. So we got an official statement from Mike Oresco. We got an official release, and then we had reports backing up the fact that the exit price here, the cost to get out of the AAC early, is $18 million per school. So depending on where you're at, your perspective on this whole thing and how much you've been following conference realignment, you can hear that number. And I would imagine, wonder, like, is that high? Is that low? What specifically am I to take from that number? Well, here is the important context for that number. And I see in the chat there, Dave says 18 million is a steal. Yes, I agree, because the important context here is that when UConn left the AAC early, UConn had to pay $17 million. There's a $10 million exit fee, and then the extra $8 million is just basically the penalty for taking off here early, right? UConn had to do 10 and 7. Well, UConn is far less consequential to the health of the conference, the American Athletic Conference at the time, than what it is to lose these three schools right now. Now, the AAC also completed and announced the incoming schools will be able to take over in 2023 too, right? So it's not like they're in a total bind from a membership standpoint overall, but the meat to that bone that is being taken away by Cincinnati leaving, UCF leaving, and Houston leaving, right? These are much more important schools than what UConn was to the league back when they left. And to only be paying $1 million more per school, 1 million more to actually leave, I think is a steal for those schools. And we also got backed up reporting. We had seen this once weeks ago and talked about it on the channel, that the original asking price from Moresco, like where the negotiations started, was $45 million. 45, and it got negotiated down to 18. So those are a couple important bits of context there. Now, I will say $45 million. I mean, that was ridiculous, and I think never, ever going to happen. But that's where you start a negotiation if you're a Resco. I can understand, you start there, and everybody else probably starts at 10, and then you work your way to 18, which is very sensible and obviously much closer to 10 than it is 45. So it would appear that the schools here really won out and got a pretty sweet deal from the AAC to get out at $18 million, which makes me very happy. I mean, look, it's not like any of these schools, I felt like there was a legitimate concern they'd be totally crippled financially in coming into the new league, but this will put a little more wind in your sail. I think all these schools are willing to do whatever it takes to get there, but this is not going to be some kind of massive financial hit that will be difficult to really overcome. And hey, everything that we've been hearing about payouts in the Big 12 lately, like what we just got where the Big 12 definitively had the third best payout for fiscal year 2021, and the Pac-12 really struggled. That's been good financial news for the Big 12. The whispers about the TV contract continue to be generally positive, and there's optimism that it could get still in that 30 to 35 million range, which maybe that will turn out to be way too high of hopes. Maybe not, but either way, that's a substantial increase from what these schools have been making in the AAC, which I believe, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was like 8 or 9 million, right, in the AAC for these schools. So they're going to make up that money rather quickly once they become fully vested members of the Big 12 here. So financially, great news, great stuff for those schools. And they're, I think, just going to take off from a financial standpoint once they get here into the Big 12. So very good. Very glad to see that. Looking at the chat here, Joe, thank you for the donation, Joe. I don't see a question or comment. I see Joe says, I was reading some things on Kansas State. Might be a tough team this year. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for being here, Joe. Thank you for the donation, as always. And yes, I think K-State is turning into – K-State went from K-State conversations are saying they may be a factor in the league championship race this year to now everybody seems to be saying it. So people have really wised up to it. Matt Miller being one of those, ESPN NFL draft scout, who said K-State's NFL prospects have him thinking the Wildcats are going to be a problem this year. So yes, I am very much looking forward to that. So thank you for the donation, Joe. If you want to be like Joe and get your question or comment in, click the $sign below the chat box where it says say something. And that's how you do that. Plus support the work that I'm doing here on the channel. So really do appreciate that. It was Brett McMurphy. That's right, Brett McMurphy. Let me credit him. Brett McMurphy had the reporting about the exit fee that I picked up that I just mentioned there for $18 million for the schools to leave the AAC. Now, here is an important part because I know how badly all of these 4 new schools want to play Texas and Oklahoma. I feel like some of the angst and frustration felt by all of the current members of the Big 12 was taken out in this last round, this last season's worth of games. There was all the talk, like Robert Allen's somewhat infamous interview now on my channel where he was talking about, hey, I would make sure to wear a helmet if I'm Oklahoma fans or Oklahoma's team for that Bedlam game at the end of the year. A lot of frustration probably got taken out in the last year, and I don't know if it means it will mean a lot to play Texas and Oklahoma for a last time, whatever it is that's going to be for these schools that are still here. But it feels much more like old news. I feel like you're going to get hungrier teams, tougher outs, tougher victories, potentially for Texas and Oklahoma there if they're going to have to play these 4 new teams because they are so damn hungry to be a part of the big time in college football. And I know some will laugh and scoff at that, but as big time as you can get when you're not one of the big 2 conferences, Big 10 or SEC, and they're going to want their shot at Texas and Oklahoma. And I think you're going to get that. Now, I thought this before we saw the tweet from Brian Davis of the Austin American-Statesman. I certainly did. But to actually see it from a legitimate Texas media member, and Brian Davis is very good. That is a very credible source, very credible reporter. He does great work for the Austin American-Statesman. And that is why it has just surprised me that nothing had leaked out to any of these guys. Like the Austin American-Statesman's full of great reporters. That's a really good newspaper. And Austin, pretty infamously, is a place with loose lips. There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, a lot of people who want to feel important, a lot of people who talk. And yet we still had not gotten any news about an exit for Texas and Oklahoma here until now. So here is the Brian Davis tweet from this weekend. It says, one high-ranking Texas source tells me now that 2024 is still a more realistic target date for Texas and OU to join the SEC early. So the Horns and Sooners are likely going to go to Provo, Houston, Cincy, and Orlando in 2023. And that echoes pretty much what I would say common knowledge, the common refrain had been, certainly what my belief was, which was that there's a decent chance they would get out in 2024. Looking like it's pretty much too late at this point to get out in 2023, and still have a hard time seeing that they would want to go through 2 full years of the awkward dance and wait until the end in 2025, and that perhaps having that season in front of them in 2024, or having that 2023 season rather in front of them, and seeing that it's going to be there and knowing they're going to have to go play those games will motivate people to write more checks and get that done and get out a year early. But it seems at this point extremely unlikely that Texas and Oklahoma are going to get out in 2023. And I would have to go back and look at what I was saying back in July, August, when we first started having those conversations and first started talking about it. But I feel like I was more on this train this whole time than some were. Like most people, it felt like just assumed Texas would be able to write these big checks, Oklahoma would be able to write these fat checks and get out. But we're talking about like 9-figure expenses here. And even for Texas and Oklahoma, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of cash to be forking over to get out of a league. And as we have sat here and watched time go on, it just hasn't happened. And it doesn't feel like there's been a ton of impetus from those teams to go make that happen right now. And so if you were somebody that was more patient about it and didn't just take that felt to me like a more nationalistic sort of view of college football, like, oh, of course, Texas and Oklahoma, they'll get out, they'll be fine. These things are moving, it's in motion, let's go. That's not what's happened at all. In fact, I saw a great tweet. I don't remember if it was from Reddit College Football or whoever, but I saw a great tweet that said everything else, all the corresponding moves to Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC have been like officially put into place now before we even know when Texas and Oklahoma are actually leaving for sure. There has been no concrete evidence on that front, but yet we know the teams that are moving, not only the teams that are coming into the Big 12, and we now know when they're coming into the Big 12, but then the teams that are replacing them in the AAC, we know who the teams are and when they are coming in. So the trickle-down stuff has all been taken care of before Texas and Oklahoma have really set an official date here. Although I understand if it's going to be 2025, there's not really any need for them to come out and set some kind of official date for that to happen. So I digress, but that should be awesome news. Like Houston fans, I can't remember if it's Juan that I was having that conversation with about how badly he really wants that game to happen. Houston v. Texas, for instance. It looks like you're going to get that crack. It looks like you're going to get that opportunity. How about like Oklahoma having to go take on Cincinnati? How about Oklahoma traveling to the Cincinnati Metro to go play that game? Sign me up for that. I would love to watch that game. What would have happened this past year if Cincinnati had lined up against Oklahoma, right? That would have been awesome to watch. BYU, we've already seen BYU beat up on Texas, getting to see that again. And UCF, man, it is reinforced again upon me today, the power of UCF Twitter and how fun and passionate they are right now. I say right now because I have heard things about UCF Twitter. You don't want to be on their bad side, right? Well, right now I'm not on the bad side. So it's all very fun and entertaining to me right now. But I can only imagine if they've got Oklahoma coming to the bounce house, what those fans are going to be like and what those conversations are going to be like, man. So I very much look forward to that. It will be so intriguing, not even just from the standpoint of those games, which I'm very happy. A lot of this show today is just about there's a lot of gratitude from me for these 4 new schools and how it's working out for them. They get out for an extremely reasonable price. Now they're going to be in the league, and it's looking like they will get a chance. They'll get around to go after Oklahoma and Texas and play. I would think at least one of those teams, right, depending on how the scheduling is going to work out and if it's going to be 1 year or 2. But that's like the best case scenario there. That's everything that these fan bases could have really wanted. And in this situation where it's a pretty mutually beneficial relationship between them and the Big 12, I'm just happy that it's working out reciprocally where they are going to be able to get a chance to play those games. So excited. Good stuff. Good stuff right now. All right. I'm going to head back to the chat here. Rob S. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the donation. As always, Rob. Rob says, disagree on Texas and OU leaving early. With the price of oil where it is, their BMDs are rolling in cash right now. They will pay to get out. Look, we'll see. We'll see, Rob. I'm just saying, look, nothing. I've seen nothing to no reporting. Obviously, there are people out there that will tell you, oh, it's going to happen earlier, but no concrete reporting or anybody that is what I would deem a credible reporter saying that they're going to get out before 2023. I've seen nothing of that. And now, like right after, that was the Brian Davis tweet came the day after the announcement that it was going to be 2023. We found out it was going to be 2023 officially. Next day, Brian Davis from the Austin American-Statesman tweets out, Texas and Oklahoma not likely. High-ranking source at Texas says they are not likely to get out before 2024. The logistics of the timing of it just don't really work out right now. I mean, we're sitting here in June of 2022 to be out in time. Like we're talking like that would all have to be done, like signed, sealed, and delivered here in like less than a year for them to be out before next season and be into the SEC. It just, we're running out of time. One, if you're just thinking about it logically from that standpoint. And then two, the only reporting that we've seen actually from a credible source would indicate that it's going the other way. So, hey, that's fine. I'm perfectly fine disagreeing there, Rob. And you make a valid point. I mean, I guess my thought on your take about like, hey, they're going to be really flush with cash here is that, I mean, I feel like Texas has the money there. Oklahoma, through the SEC, would have the money. The SEC could. There had been talk about fronting the schools some money. Like the bottom line is, if there were enough motivation from all three parties, from the SEC, from Texas, and from Oklahoma here, they could get it done. I'm sure they could get it done. But there hasn't been, clearly, to this point, to actually do it. And it's yes, it's official now that 2023 is the date for these new schools all to be here. But we've pretty much known that for a while. The reporting goes back like a month and a half ago, at least, to when we first found out like this is very likely going to happen. Even further than that, for when BYU we found out was coming in 23, and it seemed like that was going to be the date. We've known this for a while, and nothing has happened yet to the contrary to really indicate to me that there is enough motivation for that to happen, that they deem whatever that price tag would be worth it to go through and do that right now. Things can change, and probably one thing I would say in your defense there, Rob, is that like nobody saw the move coming when they left for the SEC, and it came totally out of nowhere. So maybe it is pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. Maybe they will get that figured out. Maybe there is extra money that comes in. Maybe now that it is official that it's going to be 2023, reality is setting in, and they're going to panic and decide to write that check. Another wild card will be, and I continue to say this, who is the Big 12 commissioner? Who gets hired as the Big 12 commissioner? Because right now, if I'm Bob Bowlesby, the guy who has said he felt very burned by particularly Joe Castiglione of Oklahoma, he is not going to be willing to budge much, I would not think. He's not going to be willing to really work with you. Like Oresco starting at $45 million and coming back down to $18 million with those schools, that's definitely working with the schools. It does not seem like Bob Bowlesby would be in much a mood to do that. An outgoing commissioner, retiring anyway, upset about how all of this went down. No love lost between Bowlesby and those two, Texas and Oklahoma. So maybe a new commissioner comes in and has a different kind of idea about it. You know, that would be another thing I would say on the other side. Maybe a new commissioner comes in and says like, hey, I think it's better for the league if we just cut ties. We let them get out. We make them pay a bunch, but just clean break. Let's go do it. That would be the argument for the other way. But I still just think time is not on the side of that. I doubt the new commissioner. Is going to be too friendly because I would bet that it'll be somebody that has some connection or obviously a familiarity with the situation. And now we're seeing reporting on the other side of it. So we shall see, but I appreciate the donation and I appreciate the contribution for sure to the discussion here. Valid point, certainly not an invalid point to say on the other side that you think it'll still happen. I just think all the evidence continues to push the other way. Joe, appreciate another donation. Joe says all the new Texas teams should have their chance at Texas and OU. Yeah, well, I would love for. Oh, I'm sorry. You said all the new teams. I don't know why I said all the new Texas teams. All the new teams should have their chance at Texas and OU. My bad. Reading comprehension, not very strong there for me. Yeah, I would love it. And I would love it like the way that it was listed in one of the tweets that I saw earlier today, like that, or I guess it was the tweet I just mentioned, Brian Davis, where he said, "Hey, they're probably going to have to go to Cincinnati, Provo, Orlando, and Houston." And someone said, "Yeah, just do those 4 games in a row. Make them run that gauntlet 4 weeks in a row on the schedule." I'd be all for that. All is fair in love and war, baby. And this is pretty much turned into war over a sport that we all love. But Texas and Oklahoma leaving has threatened the pure existence of all of these schools and fan bases and jobs. And I mean, there's so much on the line. And we talked about all the consequences of this back when it happened. You're going to leave? Fine. We're going to go make it as miserable as possible for you. Very similar. I feel like it's an apropos analogy to, you have the right to free speech. You absolutely do. You can say anything you want, basically, but you also could then lose your job for it. There can be consequences for it. Texas and Oklahoma, you can do whatever you want, but that doesn't keep you from consequences. Maybe that consequence is having to go play a gauntlet of a road schedule with these teams that would get their shot at you before you are out of the conference. That's the approach that I would take. Now, I'm also unaware of some of the other dynamics, and maybe there are things behind closed doors where that would be untenable because X, Y, and Z, and somebody from the Big 12 could explain that to me. Hey, if we did that to them, they wouldn't be willing to work with us on this, and it would, in the end, not be worth it for the Big 12. But I just want all those discussions to be about what is good for the Big 12 and not what is going to be nicest for Texas and Oklahoma. The time to play nice is over. That's long gone. We have way past the point of trying to play nice on that whole deal. So there you have it. Julius. Hello, Julius. Good to see you again. And thank you for the donation. Extremely generous donation, Julius. Much appreciate that, man. Julius says, "Howdy, John, BYU fan here. I'd like to give a shout out to the Utah Utes. They joined the Pac-12 and made it a priority to schedule the Cougs. I'm excited for the Cougs to join the Big 12, but I will miss those rivalry games against Utah State and Boise." Yeah, hey, there you go. Shout out to Utah for still wanting to go play the Holy War, which is a tremendous game, a tremendous rivalry. I actually have a pretty close friend from my time in Manhattan who was a BYU grad that told me a lot about the rivalry and how intense it was. I kind of knew from afar, but just hearing somebody explain it to me about what their up close and personal experience had been with the rivalry was pretty cool. So I definitely have a great appreciation for BYU and Utah in that game, and it's still being played. And yes, if you're a BYU fan, I can understand being kind of bummed to have to give up some of those games. But I will tell you, and I know, I'm sure the overall feeling is excitement. I can sense that from BYU fans for sure. But you're going to develop new rivalries. There will be new rivalries that develop and take the place of those and become very fun. A lot of people have mentioned BYU and Baylor, being that they're two pretty religious-based institutions. I think that could be a really fun game. I think that could be a really fun rivalry that develops over the years. But I think a lot of it is just much more going to come down to who plays close games. I always reference K-State, Iowa State really became a rivalry. One, because Iowa State stepped up their game and their football program got better. But two, there were just so many close games. It was close game after close game for a 5 to 10 year stretch. And that sparked a rivalry. It started to develop a rivalry between the two schools. So it can definitely happen. It will. Look, it will. It absolutely will. And maybe there are rivalries just developing between the 4 new schools that are coming in because there's kind of a territorial fight for who is going to make the best jump into the conference, who is going to take off and run instead of take off and just walk into the conference. I think that could be another factor there that really drives some of the rivalries. So great comments. Hope you guys still get to play Utah, which I would imagine is going to happen. Actually, BYU fans in the chat, fill me in on that. Is that in the plan? That for sure going to be a thing? One of the non-cons every year for BYU is going to be Utah for sure. I would certainly think and hope so, but that will make for tough schedules, which BYU knows all about because they've got a pretty tough schedule coming up this year. So appreciate that, Julius. Happy to have BYU coming into the league, and let me know in the chat what's going on with all of that. Okay. If you want to donate, like everybody who just did there, and I very much appreciate everybody who did, you can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something in order to donate. That is how you do that. Dictates where we're going with the conversation here tonight. Make sure that your voice gets heard and support what it is that I'm doing here on the channel. Okay, next up. So the debate now becomes who will have the most success in this new league. And there are a number of factors out of these four that I think you can go to. And I'm pulling up my Twitter poll right now, which again is not really a fair representation of what the people, quote unquote, really think about who is going to have the most success. It's much more like, which Twitter fan base can get a hold of it. And I'm aware of that. You have to take it all with a grain of salt. I like to ask questions about the Big 12 or K-State sometimes in the form of a Twitter poll. And I always know, you have to think about who your audience is and where their sensibilities lie. But for what it's worth, with 2,095 votes, BYU is running away with this thing as to who will have the best program over the next 10 years in the Big 12. BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, or Houston. It is BYU at 56.2%. Everybody else about the same. Cincy at 19, Houston at 12.8, UCF at 12. And really what that means is just BYU fans got a hold of this thing and they've been running away with it right now. So that is where that sits. It is such a hard question to answer. And I understand that like a sports talk radio guy, which is what I used to be. Now I guess I'm the new age version of that on YouTube. I'm supposed to have this hot take, this blistering opinion, this very strong, stern, immovable opinion about what it is that the answer to this question is going to be. But the truth is, I can listen to a case for all four and feel like it's extremely valid. I can. I mean, let's run down the list here. Cincinnati just went to the college football playoff. Period. End of sentence. You could just stop it right there and say, look, they just climbed the ladder in the AAC and went to the playoff with Luke Fickell, who's their coach. That's the answer. They will have the most success over the last 10 years. And that would not be a laughable opinion. But there's more to it even than that if you're going to argue Cincinnati. One, they've hired great coach after great coach. They always, back to the days of like Brian Kelly running around there. And I think I'm even missing was D'Antonio there? It was like D'Antonio, Brian Kelly. There have been a ton of great coaches at Cincinnati over the last 15 to 20 years, and they continue to make great hires and win games, which is why they're in the position that they're in right now with a chance to join the Big 12. So even if Fickell were to leave, which Fickell did just go through a cycle where Notre freaking Dame came open and Fickell didn't go. So you dodged a pretty major bullet there. And now Notre Dame has a really young, excitable head coach where if that works out, Marcus Freeman's probably going to be the head coach for a long time. So you're running out in an age where coaches are more likely to stay in these spots. You're running out of destinations that could be coming open for Luke Fickell to make the jump to. So I think there's plenty of reason to believe he'll be around for a while. But even if he's not, Cincinnati has this history of hiring good coaches. Now they're going to have more resources in the Big 12. That will help out their profile. And the kicker on Cincinnati, if you want to make that argument, is that they have recruited under Fickell the last 5 years. They have recruited significantly better than the other three incoming schools. Cincinnati's classes over the last 4 years. This is where I'm frustrated with myself. I set out to get the data for the last 5 years. And I'm looking at it now. I only did 4 and apparently got distracted and finished at 4. So we're going to go with 4 because I'm an idiot. But the last 4 years, Cincinnati's recruiting classes have ranked 42nd, 45th, 41st, and 66th. That's an average of 48. They have the 48th best class over the last 5 years. The next closest out of the other three is UCF at 61. So they are a full 13 spots better than any of the other newcomers in terms of average recruiting ranking where their class has been in the 24/7 composite. So Cincinnati has recruited a higher caliber of player, which I think is reflected in the past NFL draft. Not just Sauce Gardner, but there were Cincy guys going left and right throughout the draft. Now, one of those is Desmond Ridder. Luke Fickell will have to prove that he can still win at a high level without Ridder at quarterback. But I think there's plenty of evidence here to support the fact that he probably can. So they have recruited better here recently. They have had success under multiple different coaches. It's not a one-trick pony with Luke Fickell, and it looks like Fickell's going to be around for a while anyway. Plus, they did just pull off the accomplishment of making the freaking playoff. So there's absolutely an argument there for Cincinnati. But let's turn the page now. I'm going to save who I lean towards. A slight lean towards. I'm going to save them for last here in this discussion as to what my answer would be to this question. giving you my terrible, like my worst sports talk face here, where I don't have a scorching hot take. I have a slight lean, but I'm going to save that for last. Houston. Okay, the argument for Houston. Their recruiting rankings, by the way, if you're curious, it's an average of the 70th best class over the last 4 years. At 50, 85, 72, 73. And I think the class before that is where Houston really gets screwed, because I believe that was the year that they had the 35th best class with at Oliver. So partially there, Houston gets a little bit jobbed because of my laziness, whatever you want to call it, from earlier today. But they have not recruited at the level that Cincinnati has. However, it's a talent-rich hotbed. You know, when I said Cincinnati, the argument can just be, look, they just made the playoff, and this is in the 14 playoff era. The argument could begin and end for Houston with, they're in Houston. Like, that could be the argument. Just end of story, because there's so much damn talent there. And I totally get that. But beyond that, I mean, they have a legitimate head coach. Dana Holgorsen. He's a guy who's been a Power 5 head coach before, obviously at West Virginia. That is no bum at head coach. And they just had a terrific season this past year. One of those schools that won 12 games and put up a double-digit win season. Houston has proven not only can they do it hyper recently, but they've been able to do it in general with a couple of different coaches like Kevin Sumlin, like Tom Herman, here over the last 10 to 15 years. They have one of those mega boosters. You know, with Oklahoma State for so long, it was always T-Boone Pickens, right? T-Boone. Well, they kind of have their own T-Boone with Furtada, Tillman Furtada, right? And I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I know I should know that better. They have a lot of money sitting there, and he's a guy that's been donating a lot of money to the university, and they're in this talent-rich hotbed. So a lot of money, definitely some motivation there. Houston is trying to upgrade the entire university and has done a very good job of elevating the university when you're talking about not just athletics, but the university's profile as a whole. And now in an era of NIL, they have this mega booster in a place where there are kids running around all over the place like Ed Oliver that you could potentially get to stay home and play there. For Titta, I always do that. I mess up the name. All right. Thank you, Ricardo there. But you understand the case there for Houston. That's really what it is. Like they are, if you're talking about best places to recruit in the entire conference, Houston sits right there. I mean, I understand TCU is technically in the DFW Metroplex, but like Houston is literally, it's Houston. TCU's in Fort Worth. Houston, like they are the University of Houston. I think back to, if you watch the U documentary on ESPN, which I watched a number of times, they talk about Howard Schnellenberger setting out to just recruit the state of Miami, right? And just locking everything down in there in the state of Miami. And Houston is in a place where if you got good enough, you could definitely do that. The problem to me for Houston, and the reason that I would not go with them at number one, even though I think the mere fact that they're in Houston gives you a very legitimate argument for it. They have the highest ceiling of anybody just because of the proximity to talent there. And if things started to break their way and fall their way, I mean, you can see the case for how they would be a real powerhouse in this league 10, 15, 20 years from now. But there's so much competition. And I think it's becoming more difficult now because of the changes to the SEC, because it's already tough enough when you have Texas A&M, Oklahoma, everybody sniffing around there in Houston to go recruit there. But now, I mean, like LSU recruits the heck out of Houston. Texas A&M just put together the number one recruiting class in the country. They're obviously going to be all over Houston. Now you have Texas and Oklahoma, not only recruiting as Texas and Oklahoma with those brands, but they can put that SEC patch on now too, which is clearly giving A&M a boost in its recruiting. That's going to be tough, man. There's a lot of competition there. There's a lot of competition in Houston to go recruit. So that would be a part of my concern there. How much of the talent will you actually be able to get to stay home with Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, LSU being all your primary competition there, trying to go after those guys? That blunts it just enough to me. Again, I understand the case, and I would not call anybody stupid, certainly, that would say Houston is the answer to this question. But that is the hesitation that I have a bit on Houston there as it relates to this question. BYU, their average recruiting class over the last 4 years, 74.3. BYU, 55, 77, 81, 84. Those are the last four recruiting classes that BYU has put together. BYU has the advantage of being a national brand. They have the advantage of being a program that's already proven they can stand on their own as an independent. They are not afraid to go play very difficult schedules. They have obviously had recent success. They've had historic success. They will bring eyeballs. They will bring TV sets to the equation. They operate like a big-time athletic department already. They've just been looking for this kind of a home, somebody to come embrace them in a moment like this for a long time. And I think that will we've already seen it, like further rally their fan base and be able to direct some of those resources. I go back to a conversation that I was having a lot in K-State circles in basketball recruiting when K-State was after a kid that BYU was after. And the conversation there was about how BYU was a real major player already in the NIL game, that BYU has a lot of money to throw around in the NIL game. I think they are well positioned to strike in an NIL college football world. So big major brand with historical value to it. Built-in national fan base. Plus, I've heard a lot from people who had worked in leagues that BYU had played in before, like how much of an advantage. And I'm not saying this is like an attack on BYU at all, but it can be an advantage to have some of these guys coming back from LDS missions where they're 1 year, 2 years, 3 years older and kind of a men amongst boys kind of thing. Like that can be an advantage too, where they get to go play there. So I think there's a lot of reason to believe that BYU, I would not argue against if you said over the next 10 years, BYU is going to be the best football program here. Wouldn't fight you too hard on it. Wouldn't fight you too hard. I think that's a pretty compelling case for BYU. But I think you guys know where I've been leaning on this because this has kind of been the way I've talked about it since we found out about all these teams coming into the league. UCF, man, I think maybe the one thing I would say with UCF, maybe 10 years isn't quite enough. Maybe if we got a chance to make it more like 15 or 20. But if you just look at the trajectory that these teams have been on, if we had like a graph charting the trajectory of all four of these schools, it would be a lot of schools that have been rising steadily. UCF's is like, shoot, because they have not been around as long. I was going and looking at their year by year for football, and the thing on College Football Reference, it starts at I think it was 1996 is where it actually starts to look at that and to see where they have come and how fast they are moving and how big and young and brash and energetic the fan base is. They are in a metro area in Orlando. That's a place with a ton of talent in the state of Florida. And yes, there is competition in Florida, but not as heavy as there is in Houston, because right now, like Florida's been down, Florida State's been down, Miami's been down. Now, maybe the argument is that's going to change if you're a big believer in Billy Napier, if you're a big believer in Mario Cristobal, then you would say, well, it won't be quite as easy. But UCF also is getting the boost of playing in a major conference now, one of the Power 5 conferences, and a league that hopefully will long-term have a spot available to it in the playoffs. That is going to help. That is going to help. And UCF has already done a pretty good job of recruiting. Let me rattle off those numbers for you. 52, 58, 75, 60. Their last four classes, but 52 and 58 are the most the recent two. And they now have Gus Malzahn as a head coach. Again, major head coach, guy who knows what he's doing. I think the trajectory that they are on, the money that they're pouring into this, the motivation that they have from everybody on down, athletic director all the way to the very large fan base of this massive school. I love the potential of UCF over the course of 10 to 15 years. I think some of why we're not seeing quite as, like last year, the quarterback goes down in week 3, UCF fans, very early, like in September, and they go through a down year that's a 8-4 season. I mean, for that to be like the down year where they were kind of off the radar, to me shows where their program is at right now. I don't think they're going anywhere, and I think they have a world of potential. So even though Orlando is not quite the hotbed that Houston is, I like the accessibility of those players to UCF a little bit more than I do Houston, and I just like all the motivating factors that have been pushing UCF in the direction that they have been going in over the last 10, 15, 20 years of their history as a program. So that would be my pick if you put a gun to my head and made me choose somebody, but it is very close, and I would accept any number of arguments for all four of those schools there. So if you think I'm totally off base, man, let me know. Obviously in the chat, but you can also donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something, and get your question or comment up to the top so that I will see it, pins it up at the top for me, and guarantees that it will be read here on the show, plus supports the work that I'm doing to bring you Big 12 content each and every week here on this channel. Also, those of you that are in here, now that we've about doubled the size of the chat room here tonight, if you could like the video, I would appreciate it. Liking the video helps me out with the algorithm and gets it more views, all that good stuff. Doesn't cost you a dime, I promise. Doesn't cost you a dime just to click the like button on the video. That will get that going. So appreciate all of you who are in here tonight and doing that. Some other numbers. Let me finish off the point here. I forgot that I had to add. I did a little more research today. I saw like the recruiting rankings, for instance. This is the point that I was going to make. Another thing that looks pretty positive for the Big 12 right now in the league. Like Cincinnati has a top 5 recruiting class, according to the 24/7 composite right now. Again, heavily influenced by how many commits that you have right now, period, but still some juice there. Texas Tech's number 2. Baylor's 13, TCU 15, Oklahoma State 19, West Virginia 20. 6 teams out of the 12. Half of the league is in the top 20 in recruiting rankings right now. I know it's early. I know things will change and can change and all of that, but there are some teams. TCU is pretty red hot right now in the recruiting game. West Virginia is pretty red hot right now in the football recruiting game. Like we're seeing some of these schools really put their best foot forward right now on the heels of the good financial news that the Big 12 has had recently. This is what makes it such a difficult pick, beyond just who's going to have the most success of the 4 incoming schools, but also who will have the most success, period. What is going to be the best program? Who will be the dominant program in this new look league? That is why it is such a tough question to untangle, because of things that we're seeing like that right now. Boom to the Sooner. Appreciate it. Boom to the Sooner in here tonight. Feels like it's been a minute, Boom to the Sooner. So thank you for being in the chat here tonight. Boom to the Sooner says, Sooners say they'll do $300 million in additions to Gaylord Stadium. Will you come visit us to see our improved home? I would not turn it down. If I get a sincere invitation to go watch a game there, I would. I will say the tough part of it is for me, Boom to the Sooner, I've just been there a bunch of times. I'm trying to think. So I covered the games in 12, 14, 16, 18. Didn't go in 20 because of COVID. So that's 4 times that I've been there to cover a game. And then I went once in student radio in 2009. That was a 5th. And then I went all the way back in 1997 to watch Michael Bishop, the greatest college quarterback of all time, win in Norman. So I've been to the stadium 6 times. And when I'm thinking about life now outside of media world, right, where I'm, just trying to live my best life here, not having to worry about covering games and all that stuff. Like I really want to go to, I hate to say it, like an SEC game or the Big House or Columbus. Like I want to go to one of those major environments that I've never been to. I've been to the major environment at Gaylord Family Memorial Stadium, and it's no comment on it's great. It's great, but I've seen it. I've experienced it. So, hey, renovations, I'm sure it'll look great. I'm sure it'll look awesome. I would be interested if I got invited, but it will probably be lower on my list than some other places. I've been talking with some buddies where we're kicking around a couple ideas of trying to get a college football road trip together here this year or next. So maybe someday, Boom to the Sooner. But I think really the problem here is this is on you guys. I would have continued to come. I would have come to road games. I would have continued to come to games there at Gaylord Family Memorial Stadium, but you guys left. So you kind of, you threw John Kurtz out with the bathwater on that one. I'm sorry to say. But no, in all seriousness, I appreciate the info there. I actually don't know that I was aware of that. And 2, I appreciate you being in the chat tonight and donating as always. All right. We are, man, I hope things haven't been, I'm picking up things have been a little testy maybe in the chat, guys. Let's, hope it's not getting too wild and out of control there. But I do appreciate those of you that are here tonight. You can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something, if you want to support what I'm doing here on the channel, and make sure your question or comment gets to the top of the chat. All right, so here is my Oklahoma State fan that got mad at me last time. I promised you I'll get this in here. I do apologize for teasing it out last time, not actually getting to it. That kind of made my heart hurt. It's like a former radio guy. Like I've had people in the industry that would tell me man, you cannot tease something and not deliver. That is the worst thing you can do to a listener. So that hurt my old radio heart. I messed up on that. But this is from Stuart Mandel's mailbag recently, where he got asked the question, is Oklahoma State a top 20 program? Because again, I think I've answered before. If you put a gun to my head and say who's going to be the best team in the new Big 12 over the next 10 years, I think the safe pick is Oklahoma State, just because of the unparalleled consistency among the remaining members of the conference and the incoming members of the conference. Oklahoma State's had that consistency. Gundy knows what he's doing. Doesn't appear that it's slowing down anytime soon. They had a great year last year. I think they'd be the safe pick if you were going to go with who would have the most success there. And the question being asked, are they a top 20 program? To me, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And the case that Mandel makes is that basically on the field, yes, Oklahoma State is, but because they don't have quite the notoriety of like a top 20 brand, that it might be beauty is in the eye of the beholder here. Like, it just depends on who you ask as to whether or not they're a top 20 program. But to me, I'm like, no, just give them their respect. Who cares what their brand appeal is across America? They're a top 20 program because they win. Like, they win enough to be a top 20 program. Oklahoma State is tied with Notre Dame, who, by the way, they beat in the Fiesta Bowl last year for the 10th most wins in the country since 2010. So 2010, we're talking a 12-year, I guess, 12 seasons. That'd be 12 seasons. In the last 12 seasons, Oklahoma State has the 10th most wins in the country. I mean, I feel like period, end of sentence right there to stop the discussion. Oklahoma State is a top 20 program in the country. No doubt. They have 113 wins, by the way. Like Notre Dame. I mean, if you asked any Joe Schmo college football fan, is Notre Dame a top 20 college football program? Like, the answer is going to be yes. People may think they're overrated, and they are, but they're still easily a top 20 program. Well, Oklahoma State has just as many wins as them since 2010. Oklahoma State's finished ranked in the top 20 of the AP poll in 8 of the past 12 years. 8 of the past 12 seasons, the rankings would indicate that they're literally a top 20 program based on where they have finished. They've won 10 or more games 7 times in the past 12 years. Like that's another very strong bullet in the chamber here of this argument. Reading here through his notes, he says, it's not Alabama or Clemson, but it fared a whole lot better over the past decade plus than USC, Texas, and Florida, among others. Very true. Those would be schools that if you went and asked anybody, are they top 20 programs? Like, people would say yes, just because of that logo on the side of the helmet. But they have not been doing as much as what Oklahoma State has done in the Mike Gundy era. Now, here's what Mandel had to say about the perception part of this. He said, I don't get the sense people's perception of Oklahoma State changed much during the time period. Its brand is certainly better established than it was pre-Gundy, but it doesn't seem to have broken through to the extent that other non-blue bloods like Oregon or Michigan State have. Oklahoma State still finishes outside of the top 25 in recruiting every year. As I wrote about last year, Oklahoma State doesn't draw nearly the TV audience of Oklahoma or Texas. Last November, for example, it played back-to-back primetime games. While ranked as a top 10 team against TCU and Texas Tech, neither cracked 2 million viewers. I know everybody's going to love that, right? Stuart Mandel going back to the TV number trope about Oklahoma State there. Okay, I would also point out, Stuart, that when they played Baylor in the Big 12 championship game, almost 8 million people watched it. So, people will tune in under the right circumstances to watch Oklahoma State. But I get the point. Now, if he's going to say they're not Oregon, no, they're not Oregon. They also haven't won at as high a clip. Like the high highs have not been there quite the way it has for Oregon, a team that has played for the national championship, been in a college football playoff. Michigan State has been in a playoff. I would almost bristle at that, though, a little bit. Maybe the one thing Michigan State has going for it, honestly, is that the perception has turned so much into Big Ten and SEC and everybody else that the mere factor in the Big Ten has given them more of that. But I don't know. I think Oklahoma State is a more fun program. They play a more fun style. They've got a coach that, Mark D'Antonio was just a boring coach. I would take the Oklahoma State brand over the Michigan State brand. So I would argue that one. But in defense of Oklahoma State and their program, the consistency with which they have continued to just churn out wins in the shadow of Oklahoma and Texas in terms of prestige in the league, when they're right there in the state of Oklahoma having to directly compete so often with those schools, I'm going to say that they definitely are a top 20 program. And maybe that's another piece of this too. Listen, I'll make one more point on this, and let me just say this is like your 2 to 3 minute warning. Going to wrap things up here. We're approaching an hour, so if you have anything that you want to get in, if you've got a question or comment you want to see covered that we have not talked about yet, make sure and hit that $sign below the chat box where it says say something to get that in. That is how you can do that. Support the work I'm doing here on the channel and make sure I get to your question or comment. But one thing that strikes me as I'm talking about this with Oklahoma State here is they have been beaten over and over again by Oklahoma. Last year notwithstanding, obviously, and that was awesome. But they struggled so often against Oklahoma. And he brought up, hey, nobody watches these games in prime time. Even when they're playing games in prime time against other good teams, the TV numbers are not good. That is true. A lot of people, though, will tune in to watch Oklahoma. And so in these games where they're playing Oklahoma, where there's a lot of spotlight there in Bedlam, Mike Gundy's squad has not fared very well. They have not beaten Oklahoma very often. So I would wager a guess that probably has affected some of the perception, too, that people would look at it. And it's very easy to write off, as we all know, just a Big 12 school. Big 12 school that wins 8 to 10 games every year, whatever. They have an easy schedule. They get pounded by Oklahoma every year. They're not really that good. I would imagine that probably factors into it too, which I think is a little bit unfair. I do think that is a little bit unfair there for Oklahoma State. All right, Boom to the Sooner coming in here. Boom to the Sooner says, are the 2022 Sooner softball team the best softball team ever? Well, all I can tell you is what I'm told by those who actually have followed the sport, because I will just admit I'm out way over my skis here on the softball conversation. The softball, I've not watched a ton of it, but it has been fun. What I've seen, it seems very exciting. And I'm somebody that will pull hard. I'll ride hard for college baseball. I think college baseball is a pretty entertaining product. College softball seems to also be a very entertaining product. And everything that I've read and seen about the Oklahoma softball team would indicate that, they probably are. So I would say yes, Boom to the Sooner, but just know that is me relying solely on the expertise of others to make that distinction. But Oklahoma fans, I can only imagine how fun it has been to watch your team go do that. I will say there's nothing like, and it's been a while, K-State won the Big 12 in baseball in 2013, and that was so damn fun to have in the spring when it's like that lull and you don't have college basketball, you don't have college football, you're waiting for what's coming up next, you're waiting for football season, to have a team in one of those spring sports going on a run like that you can follow and get into is a joy and really helps bridge that gap. So for Oklahoma fans, I can only imagine how awesome it's been to have those girls to watch, and the season that they put together to watch. Pretty great. This is also making me yearn for 2012 and 2013 when K-State won the Big 12 in football, basketball, and baseball in the same year. Those were the days. Those were the days. All right. That's about it for me. I think that's going to wrap it up here. Let me just say, I'm going to put up speaking of polls, I'm going to try and put up a poll sometime within the next couple of days to see if I can nail down an official time, what time most people think would work best for them on Sunday and Wednesday nights for these live chats, because I will fully admit one thing I've not been good about is giving you a consistent time. And I think it would help me and help everybody else if we can just plan on a set time. I'll work around it and be able to make it work if I know that there's a time when it's a sliding time. It's so much easier for me to be I'll get to that later. Trying to put off my own procrastination here by getting a time nailed down. So I'd like to know from you guys what you think the best time is. I'm thinking 7 o'clock, this seems to be about when the audience is typically the highest. So I would imagine that's going to be the case. But I'll try and give you guys a chance to actually weigh in on a poll about that through the YouTube channel. So if you are a subscriber, you should be able to see that when I just put those posts up, as opposed to an actual video or piece of content. But that is something that I will get to you guys here soon and just try to look for. Before we get to football season next year, I want to get some of those things in place, a steady, consistent schedule, something you guys can count on a little bit more from me. Where I went through this past 6 months of really big transition in my life, it's made it a little harder to be on top of my game as far as that's concerned. So Boom to the Sooner gets in one more time. Thank you, Boom to the Sooner. Boom to the Sooner says, are you rooting for the Sooners to win the baseball College World Series? Well, let me say this. I was very surprised that happened. Now, Skip Johnson, that's a name that I've known for a long time, obviously, for the work that he did. His previous stop before Oklahoma, being around the Big 12. Oklahoma has always been, so I did K-State baseball play-by-play for 7 years, and it was Oklahoma always had a lot of talent and just kind of would tease you in spurts and never fully delivered on what you thought that they should do. Just kind of underachieving, to be honest, was what I thought the reputation of Oklahoma baseball had been. So surprised to see that, but they were a good team this year. I did get a chance to watch them a couple of times this year. That was a good team. I will not, however, be rooting for them to win the College World Series. I won't. I'm sorry. I just can't. I can't Boom to the Sooner. It's nothing personal. It's not you. It's me. And I hold too much of a grudge for that. I will not be able to do it. It also looks like Texas is probably going to go there, even though ECU had them totally on the ropes yesterday. I don't know how they let that game get away from them. So, yeah, I would not be rooting for Texas or Oklahoma in that scenario. I'm not sure who I would be rooting for. I mean, like Notre Dame's one of the other teams that's made it. These are all like, can we get a fun, scrappy upstart to root for? I would appreciate that as opposed to having to take my choice between Texas, Oklahoma, or Notre Dame. But alas, that is where we're at. That is where we're at. All right, it's been a good chat. We're right at an hour. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out tonight. I tell you every time, one, like the video on your way out here if you haven't yet. If you are watching this taped and not live, you can donate to the channel by hitting me up on Venmo. It's John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. Follow me on Twitter at JLKurtz. And if you want to get in contact with me, that's the easiest way to do so. Just send me a DM. Those are open. And I try to be pretty responsive in getting back in touch with everybody on that front. And just spread the word. Spread the word about the channel to your friends. If you have Facebook groups, whatever group texts that you're in with other fans of your squad that you think would be interested in Big 12 content, send them a link. Let them know about the channel. Get them subscribed too. And let's continue to grow this thing as we head into new look Big 12, which we know is going to be new in 2023 now as of this weekend. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight, guys, and I will talk to you soon.